We're here today to talk about shopping addiction. Approximately 2 to 5% of Americans have a shopping addiction. We're joined today by a former shopaholic. Her name is Avis Cardella.
Hi, I'm Avis Cardella, author of Spent, Memoirs of a Shopping Addict.
And we're also joined by Dr. April Lane Benson. She's the author of I Shop, Therefore I Am, Compulsive Buying and the Search for Self.
Hi, I am also the author of To Buy or Not to Buy, Why We Overshop and How to Stop.
And we also have here with us Dr. Ramani Durvasula. She's the addiction expert featured on Oxygen Channel's My Shopping Addiction. So, Dr. Benson, maybe we can start with you. In your professional opinion, how would you describe a shopaholic?
Well, it's somebody who, quite simply, spends more time, so much time, energy, and or money shopping or even thinking of shopping and buying that it's impairing their life in a significant way. Usually we think first of financial impairment. Somebody's up to their eyeballs in debt, has no money for retirement, emergencies, etc. But it also affects us in many other ways. Interpersonally, a lot of marriages break up over compulsive buying. Parents and children have a lot of strife, interpersonal problems, anxiety, guilt, shame. Personal space consequences, somebody who buys so much stuff they can't even make it use the rooms for the purpose for which they were intended, and of course spiritual consequences and occupational ones. So it's when we use shopping as an equal opportunity, all-purpose mood changer.
Okay, and Dr. Ramani, would you add anything to that?
One thing I would add to that is that there's different reasons that people shop. And I think that's what makes this such a difficult problem to treat, because some people are trying to address an emptiness, some people are trying to address mood, some people are trying to fix stuff from childhood. Like many shoppers I've worked with will talk about a childhood characterized by deprivation, and they want to make that right. Some people will be very much driven by sort of an obsessive compulsive drive to have a certain thing, and they have certain rituals. And because it's so heterogeneous, it can often make it a challenging disorder to treat. It's not always created the same. So it's everything Dr. Benson said about how we have to struggle with all the interpersonal impairment and the spending problems and all that, but because it's different every time, that's what makes it real tricky to treat.
Okay, and Dr. Ramani, how would you compare a shopping addiction to, say, an addiction to alcohol or to drugs?
One of the big differences is obviously the physiological element. I mean, we have a heck of a lot more data showing the physiological impact of alcohol and drug abuse on the brain, so you are sometimes fighting a slightly different battle. But I think with shopping, to me, one thing that's very, very unique about shopping as a problem is that whereas with drug use, you use the drug, you get a high, that's reinforcing, but later on you tend to feel not very good. With shopping, not only do you get reinforced at the time you make the buy, but later on, many times, particularly with a lot of the apparel and clothing and accessory shoppers, you look so great. I love that new dress. They keep getting reinforced over and over and over again. The more a behavior gets reinforced, the harder it is to change. That's a little different than the substance abusers, where over time using drugs can actually really start taking wear and tear on them, and they start losing lots of people that way. Shoppers do that, but it's a slower burn.
Avis, can you tell us about how your shopping addiction first started?
Yeah, it was a while ago now, but I remember it very clearly. I had loved to shop with my mother, and after my mother's death, I began to go to shops quite often just to seek refuge, to feel safe, to feel comforted by being in shops. And I found that buying things helped me, I thought, gain a sense of equilibrium. What I didn't realize, and consequently realized many years later, is that I was just masking my pain. I was masking my grief. I was using shopping just as a way to fill the void that was in my life after the death of my mother. And this went on for many years without me realizing it. It was something that just continued. And as Dr. Ramani said, it continued in a way where it was reinforced. I was buying clothing and cosmetics, and it was very much reinforced by the outside world, particularly in New York in the 1990s, when shopping was reinforced by everybody because it was just the thing to do. So it was a very difficult thing for me to understand that I was doing and that it was detrimental, in fact, to my well-being.
What was the experience like when you would walk into a store? How did you feel? What did you do?
As I said, it was like a refuge. I loved the environment I can remember distinctly walking through racks of clothing and feeling almost, if you will, like it was the forest of clothing, and just feeling comforted by the fact that all these things were around me, and I loved the high of the buy. I loved the purchase. I hated myself afterwards, eventually, when it got to a point where there was financial problems and I didn't understand what I was doing. But I would actually sometimes find myself getting physically excited about the idea of shopping for something, feeling agitated, feeling excited about it, feeling my heart beat faster, getting very much a thrill out of the fact that I was shopping. Yeah, it was very much like that. Yeah.
We were curious too, what was your relationship like with the sales clerks? Did you see them as friends, or did you not really pay attention to them, or?
No, I wasn't particularly friendly with any, but they were very friendly with me, especially when I had some money to spend. But no, I wasn't. It was a very solitary thing for me, my shopping, and I know this is, and maybe the doctors can address this. This might be a bit unusual. I don't know how usual or unusual it is, but I was a very solitary shopper. I didn't want to speak to anybody. I didn't go shopping with girlfriends. I really, really wanted to be alone in that environment and just suck up whatever feelings I could that were somehow helping me fill that void. And that became something that was just for me. Really, that was it. So I had people that knew me in shops, and there was a particular shoe salesman who I was friendly with, and we chatted and stuff. But it wasn't like I gravitated towards that as being some sort of comfort. It wasn't that kind of relationship.
Dr. Benson, would you say that most shopaholics actually go shopping by themselves instead of with other people?
Just like Dr. Ramani said about having so many reasons, different people have different reasons for over-shopping. I think the way that people overshop is also quite different. On the Oxygen show, there were quite a few overshoppers who used to go shopping with friends. And I would say more than that, the people that I've worked with do tend to shop by themselves. And one of the reasons that the internet is such a fertile ground for compulsive buying is because of the anonymity and the lack of social interaction.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Dr. Ramani, speaking of social interaction, have you seen with the folks you work with on the show, how do these shopping addictions sometimes affect their personal relationships with friends and family?
Almost categorically, they destroy them. Because what you've got to remember is with any addiction, and this really does, again, go back to what Dr. Benson said, and with any diagnosis, is that we really look at the impact these have on personal relationships. And keep in mind, look at how many of our shoppers were borrowing money. They were borrowing money from friends, borrowing money from family, not paying them back, and their friends weren't necessarily flush either. And so that can be often where it begins, because other people are being impacted. Either you're not paying the rent that you share, or you're not paying them back on a debt. So that can obviously destroy relationships right there. But also Dr. Benson raised the really important point of marriages. Now, strangely, I think because we were working with a lot of young folks, we didn't have a lot of, in fact, I don't think we had anyone married on the show. But one woman, I mean, in one particular beat we had done, she had to choose between a purse and a boyfriend, and she chose the purse for 24 hours. I mean, so it was that powerful. She wanted this bag that badly. So you better believe that there are some people who literally cut themselves off from marriages, even from kids. They will do things that will put their children's financial world in jeopardy. So, but on my shopping addiction, what we really saw was leaning on other people for financial resources was what was undercutting those, and ultimately, in many cases, destroying those relationships.
Avis, how did your shopping addiction affect your relationships with family and friends? Did it have any damaging effects?
I think they did, but not for the same reasons Dr. Ramani just mentioned. They did because I was just not being truthful in my relationships. I was not telling the truth that I was spending time shopping. I was hiding my grief. I was involved in just covering up a lot of emotions, and I think eventually it took a toll on my relationships. What I did is I broke up a long-term relationship at some point, and then I found that I couldn't get into a relationship for several years while I was trying to cope with my shopping. It might have been because I was aware that I wasn't going to be successful in a relationship or not, but I found that I just wasn't able to get into a serious relationship for a few short years while I was really figuring out what was going on with me emotionally and coping with the shopping.
And how did your shopping habits affect your finances? How big of a hit did they take?
For me, it wasn't dramatic. It was dramatic enough that I had credit card debt. I've heard some stories where it was really, really shockingly dramatic. But I think I caught myself at a point where I was able to go into a credit counseling service, and I found a very good one. I think I was lucky because I found one right away that was very good, and I found an excellent credit counselor who put me on a program, and I was determined at that point to stick with it. So I had credit card debt, but I did. I think the doctors will say that the first thing to do is that's like the bleeding. If you have credit card debt, you have to deal with that, and that's what I did. So I, excuse me, put myself on a program, and then after that I dealt with the emotional things. But getting my finances in order, stopping the bleeding was the first thing to do, and that's the first thing I did when I decided that I was going to try to cope with my shopping problem.
Before people reach out to credit counseling and other resources for help, they do have to admit to themselves that they have a shopping addiction. Dr. Ramani, is that what you see as one of the most difficult parts in the process?
Absolutely, because if they don't think it's a problem, even when people around them are saying you shop too much, you spend too much, if they're in denial about that, which obviously denial is the hallmark of an addiction, you're not going to be able to create change. And so this isn't as simple as a family member saying you need to go make this change. The person doesn't think it's a problem. They may just think everyone around me is a killjoy. They're jealous of my new things and that kind of thing. And the other point I want to make too is money is not the only resource people have. The other killer resource is time. And the more time people spend shopping, the more time they're away from their loved ones. So it may not necessarily be, somebody may have plenty of money, but all that time spent shopping means that they're not with other human beings. So that's another twist we have to put on it. But when it comes down to it, if you don't think there's a problem, you can bring the horse to water, but you sure as heck can't make him drink.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Benson, with that, do you see shopping addicts, do you see their personalities changing during their addiction and then they struggle to find themselves again?
Well, I think that just like with Avis, somebody who would have been mourning, let's say, and is using shopping as a way to deflect that, you don't see what would be normally an appropriate response to some kind of a loss. And one of the things that we know is that one of the ways out of this is strengthening the underlying muscles that help us to tolerate our emotions without having to spend them away. So yes, as people recover from this, they appear much more solid, and you may see much more emotional texture. But hopefully they're ready to be able to tolerate that and make good use of it.
Avis, aside from the financial counseling and putting your finances back together, what behavioral changes did you have to make to put a stop to your addiction?
Well, it was enormous, and I appreciate what Dr. Benson just said, because that's exactly what happened to me. I didn't deal with my grief for many years, and when I realized that it was something that had to be dealt with, I basically had to go through a process of grieving many years after my mother had died. But that did afford me a foundation of a much more emotional, solid foundation. And I found myself changing dramatically. Many things I had to go through, besides the financial counseling, had to do with dealing with the emotion. So I had to reconnect with my family. I had to get a sense of where my strength was going to come from. I had to reconnect with myself in a physical way. I spent an enormous amount of time shopping, and I wasn't taking care of myself physically. I would actually not buy food so I could buy, stuff. And I went through. It was sometimes it was 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. It took an enormous amount of time, enormous amount of energy, and an enormous amount of self-reflection. But these were all things I did, admitting it, speaking to my family about what my problem was, having being responsible for my finances, and then being responsible to my emotions also became a big part of my recovery. Being mindful, in fact, and conscious of what I was doing was so important for me, and I've been an ex-shopping addict for 10 years now, this year, 2013, and I can say in those 10 years I really have made an enormous change in the way I relate to shopping at all. So it's been really I am like a different person in that regard.
Well, Avis, for one, congratulations.
Thank
what
you.
A feat. Yeah. And I'm curious, are there any sort of, I guess with any addiction, there's that chance of relapse. Are there any sort of day-to-day routines or activities or exercises you do to sort of stay on track and avoid falling back into a shopping addiction?
Well, I think that's something I had to do at the beginning. But I think if you approach it the right way and you really get to the root of what your shopping addiction is about, get to why you are shopping, and as the doctors both said, there are many, many reasons. Everybody has their personal reason. But for me, I don't have a day-to-day, I can't do this or I should do this, because I got to the root of it and I really basically pulled it out from the root. So I have a completely different relationship to my shopping today. At the beginning, though, I had to make sure that if I felt emotionally down, I didn't go into a shop, that I went walking instead, or went to a yoga class, or did something that was physical, so to get my mind and my energy someplace else. I had to remember to be responsible to my credit counseling and make sure I always saved the money to pay my bills on time and do that. I just had to come up with different ways that I would not choose shopping. But eventually that all changed, and I got to a point where I understood what it was about, and I changed my whole attitude to shopping. I think that's possible for everybody who's a shopping addict, to really change over time and then be able to shop again and shop happily and healthily, shop in a completely different manner. And I think sometimes people don't believe they can do that when they're in the midst of the shopping addiction, but I'll attest to that it's possible after 10 years. Yeah.
Dr. Benson, in addition to the strategies that Avis just mentioned, do you have any other tips for other shopping addicts in terms of preventing relapse into their old habits?
There are several. One is to really think about what are your high-risk situations. Are they a fight with your boss? Are they after work when nobody else is home and you're bored? Is it your birthday? So high-risk situations are important to be aware of. And then I also ask people to ask themselves and answer these 6 questions when they are contemplating a purchase that they have any question at all about. Why am I here? How do I feel? Do I need this? What if I wait? How will I pay for it, and where will I put it? And if you can ask and answer those questions satisfactorily, it's very unlikely that it's a compulsive purchase.
Dr. Romney, would you add anything to that?
I think I really want to go back to what Avis said. In fact, I have a new book called You Are Why You Eat, but believe it or not, there's a whole chapter on shopping because it's another form of consumption. And she really comes down to it with the mindfulness. I think what I love about Dr. Benson's tips, it's about how to construct your environment differently. It's, and I'm hardcore with my patients initially. Like, in other words, no more credit cards. You don't leave the house with a credit card. You really walk out of the house with what you can spend, because otherwise they are pretty dysregulated. Make them change all their credit card numbers so that way they can't just quickly go online and make purchases. It really is, it's like a cleaning house, like cleaning out your cabinets. But then after those structural changes, and you can tolerate the emotion, it is then to be mindful and to ask those questions, Dr. Benson's questions, even write them on a card or put them on your phone, stick them in your purse, and ask yourself those, because that's what it is. It's about stopping and then having an alternative thing to do when you want to shop. So you don't, when you want to go to the mall, instead you take a walk, you go on Facebook, you call a friend, you do something else. So I think it's that mindful piece. It's that one beat you wait, ask yourself those questions, and then go do something else. You can save thousands and thousands of dollars in many, many relationships.
A lot of shopping addicts, their first initial impulse is to just cut up all those credit cards, like you said, close those bank accounts. Is that a temporary fix? Is that a good way to start things off?
You know, to me, that is it's almost like, you know, when we originally put someone in inpatient rehab for substance use, it's just a way to make them tolerate not shopping. And like many addicts, they're going to find a way, like people will find a way to drink or drug, you know, even when they're committed to treatment. So the idea of like taking away those methods initially, that's the period in which they need to learn to tolerate the feeling of not being able to shop. So you've taken away the tools to do so. Then obviously that there has to be a slow transition back to needing the credit cards and all of that stuff in their life, but finding a way to moderate it. I've also worked with clients where I actually work in line with their accountant. Like it's me, the accountant, and the patient, and we all work together to come up with a plan.
You know, you can never get enough of what you don't really need.
Right,
and
it's true.
And, you know, it's like looking for love in all the wrong places.
Yes, yes.
So people really have to figure out what it is they're really shopping for.
Yes,
it's
yes,
not that that 8th pair of black boots.
No.
And
No.
go and find a way to meet that need.
Exactly. Yep. That's it.
Avis, is there anything else you'd like to share about your story, about your shopping addiction that you had and got rid of?
Yeah, on the happy end of it, I'll just say that now I feel like a much more empowered shopper now. And one thing that I see a lot is you see a lot of these cold turkey kind of no more shopping or don't shop for a year kind of suggestions, and to me that just will never work. It might be a temporary fix, but I think in the long run, the idea is that you be able to go into a shop and to be able to cope with shopping in a very healthy way, in a way that you feel empowered, you feel in control, and you are in control. The shopping doesn't control you. And that's today that I understand and that I feel great about, and that is something that I think every shopping addict can get to that point and be on that other side of things and be a shopper, but be a shopper who knows how to take control of the situation and be empowered by shopping rather than be destroyed by it.
Well, Avis, thank you very much for sharing your story with us today. Thank you, Dr. Benson and Dr. Romani. We really appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here.
Yeah,
Great,
thank you,
thanks.
everyone.
Thanks
Yeah.
for having me.
Thank you.